Can you tell us some of the stories of the people that you met and tell us the impact of what you guys have been doing on the streets?
I mean, there's been a number of stories that have really changed the way that I thought about healthcare and the way I thought about what we were doing, even more so than like demonstrated success necessarily. Like I remember one of the first patients that we saw was Joe. He was in his 70s, naval veteran, had a master's degree from Lehigh, a PhD from Cal.
Wow.
And he was a clinical psychologist in one of the state hospitals before it closed. And coming back from the war, he had been kind of like a functional alcoholic, where he would drink most of the weekend, sober up to work during the week, and then when the hospital closed, he was less functional because he didn't have a job to go to every day. And he had a small pension. When I met him, he was most of the time living outside in a tent with one of his patients, one of his old patients that was suffering from schizophrenia, who he continued to take care of, even after the hospital closed. But between the two of them, probably a week or two, they would stay in a hotel together, and then they'd be on the street together. And I remember he had fallen and broken his ankle, and we were in the hospital, and they had cleared him to discharge to go home. But the hospital, we didn't recognize what his home situation was like. He had walked with the walker with his broken leg in like the flat surface, 50 yards, home with home PT. But he lived in this riverbed. And in order to just get food, he had to climb out of the riverbed, hop a fence, and walk multiple blocks, which at 75 was a problem before the broken leg, but now was really going to be difficult. So I remember going to see him out there, and he had tried to hop that fence again, but fell. And when I got there, I saw his patient. He walked up to me, and there was blood on his pants, and he had told me that Joe had fallen. And so I saw Joe, and there was blood coming from his head, and thankfully it was not a major injury, and he survived. But it made me think about the failure of recognizing the reality that people live in when we're making decisions, and different policies, that their lives are so much different from ours. But I knew the people in the hospital, and I knew that they really cared. They didn't knowingly make a bad decision. But it made me realize that lack of empathy is really a lack of the imagination. That we need to go to the people and see what their life is like, and then report back when we're making any sort of decisions.
Do you think people like that are uncomfortable to tell their situation? Did he tell the hospital his situation?
Yeah, I think part of it is that. Part of it is there's a shame element to it. My experience is that if you are experiencing homelessness, that trumps everything else. For example, we have people with intellectual disabilities who are part of the regional center, but who's supposed to take care of them for life. But once they become homeless, they don't do homeless services. Or people who are elderly, who should be in a nursing home, and if they were in a house, the nursing home would accept them, but they don't do homeless placement. So this experience trumps all other things. That's why we call it not a vulnerable population, but an expelled population. The other thing is people don't always know what's relevant for the medical field to know. For example, I think about another patient, also elderly, he was blind, with end-stage heart disease, end-stage kidney disease, and he had atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular heartbeat, which can cause a stroke. And you take a blood thinner for those things. And in order to get to him, there was this bridge, that his friends made to get over this river and then you had to. This is in L.A. This is not Pennsylvania, and then you had to like trek into the woods. But the problem was at night, because he was blind, he only saw shadows, and so he didn't know if what he was seeing was a solid object or just a shadow. So he would get scared and then sleep wherever he was. He would just lay down where that was. And so if you were to see him, like when he would go into the hospital for his heart or for his kidneys, they would just discharge him just like they would anybody else, not realizing that like his biggest risk of death was falling in the ravine.
Wow.
On the blood thinners, not his heart. Or like, they would have him, he was on water pills, diuretics, because of his heart failure. But he also didn't have good access to water, and was like forced to walk around all day, walk around to get anything, in and out of his encampment, and was wearing multiple layers of clothing, even in the summer, not because he was psychotic and didn't know what temperature it was, but because he had no dresser. And so all this called increased water loss. The hospital didn't know this and would give him too high of a dose of the diuretics, which would cause kidney failure. But he wouldn't know to like tell them these things. So it's our responsibility to flush out what the reality is of their life and make a reality-based treatment plan.